Greetings. It is Monday, December the 9th, 2024. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. There is a lot to unpack this morning, a great deal of news. So I'm going to get rid of something quickly that everyone's talking about, but is not as relevant to the world around us as we would like to think, and that's the CEO shooter in New York, or who used to be in New York. And it has taken over the imaginations of the American people. And however tragic it is, and I'm sorry, murder is a pretty horrendous thing no matter who it's done to and whatever the perceived justice is, it's, on the scheme of things, not all that big a deal in terms of the world around us right now. Here's why. First off, all the speculation that's going on. What type of gun did he use? What were his motives? Where did he come from? You know, it's speculation. It's guessing. We don't know anything. The police probably do, but they're not going to tell us anything until someone gets arrested. Whether or not the guy gets away, or whether or not they know who he is and they're about to take him away in handcuffs as of this recording on Monday morning, we don't know. It's something that Americans have fallen in love with over the years. It's the whodunit. The only thing that people are wondering is if they have political or social views that will match those of the killer. That's kind of the way things go these days. When you hear about something horrendous going on, you're thinking, oh, I hope he belongs to the other side. Kind of a sad commentary. Well, whether or not they catch the guy or when they catch the guy or whatever his motives are, we don't know, folks. It's a sad thing when someone gets killed in New York, but a lot of people get killed in New York, including people visiting. What this has demonstrated is something that liberal New York government needs to be accounted for, and that is when they do decide to pursue a killer, they do go all out, and they'll probably catch the guy in cooperation with the FBI, since the criminal has obviously left the state. And the FBI is called in whenever there's a criminal that has crossed state lines or a crime involves more than one state. The thing that needs to be pointed out is that if the resources are put into solving crimes, usually you can solve them, or at least give the criminal a good run for their money. Someone who's been murdered in New York, someone who's been murdered in Los Angeles, someone who's been murdered in another big city, they don't get anywhere near this much attention. The reason the CEO and his demise are getting the attention they're getting is because of the economic impact that it could create on New York. If the heads of major corporations are not going to feel safe walking down the streets of the Big Apple, that is a major financial hit for New York, because New York considers itself the economic hub of the planet, not just for banking, but for commerce of all kinds. So that's why they're pouring all these resources into catching the culprit. The funny thing is that with all the billions of dollars that New York has spent or borrowed to take care of invaders who have illegally entered the United States and were put up in hotels, in some cases 5-star hotels in New York, think of all the crimes that could have been solved if those resources were directed towards law enforcement. Sadly, I have seen New York at its best, and in the 1990s, I visited it for the first time in years, and I was blown away at how beautiful it was. Giuliani was running the city at the time, and he did so with an iron hand, and that's what you need in a city. And it was a great place. It was beautiful. There was shopping. The restaurants were magnificent. I remember meeting one of the members of my family there, and he called me and said, we're going to meet in Times Square. And last time I had been in Times Square, it was a sewer, but we went to a wonderful restaurant and it was great. You know, you need to have a strong hand and a great deal of law enforcement in any city to keep things orderly. Sadly, well, New York is playing catch up, and until they have a much more shall we say, right-wing authoritarian government there, it's going to continue to decline. Anyways, I want to get that story out of the way because there are many more to look at. The big news today globally is, of course, Syria. Now, for those of you who aren't really familiar with that country's situation, let me just summarize it as saying it is currently the most complicated in the world internally in terms of factions, fighting the government that's just fled, to all the external players involved. It's actually the most complicated political situation in decades, and it's going to get weirder. I am not going to begin to try to explain it to you, but let's just say the Assad government has ruled that country with an iron fist for more than half a century, and they were no angels. In fact, I had a colleague who was Syrian in the news business once, whose father had been a newspaper editor and had been killed by the regime there for publishing things that they didn't agree with. It's a thug state. But it was the last of the nationalist states of the Middle East, one that was not focused on religion, was focused on Arab nationalism. Iraq used to be like that. A lot of other places were. Egypt used to be like that. But now it's been overthrown. Assad has now fled to Russia, been very instrumental in keeping that conflict going and keeping his government going. Iran has been on the side of the regime there, which is interesting because there's a lot of factions there that are fundamentalist Islam. It's a mess. The danger is that Israel, which annexed the Golan Heights, which is a piece of territory that's high up, as the name insinuates, between Syria and it, they've now moved a little bit further into Syria, we're hearing today. The first time that's happened since about 1967, 68. And Russia has a couple of military bases in Syria that are now surrounded by hostile forces. That doesn't sound too good, does it? The Americans are taking credit for this, or I should say the Biden administration, and he's talking about immediately pouring money into the country. Oh boy, another country that the U.S. could pour money into to rebuild, even though there are still survivors of hurricanes in Tennessee and in North Carolina that are living in tents this winter. To say nothing of all the other problems this country has. Yeah, the Russians have ships in the area, they have planes in the area. It doesn't look good. You're going to start seeing a government that was, in spite of it being tyrannical and monstrous, was more or less modern compared to what's coming in the door. Remember ISIS? Yeah, not the goddess from ancient Egypt that we all used to know and love. But the nasty people that love cutting off heads, well, they're back, except they're back in a different name, and there's several different factions of them. So you see all these different groups that have different agendas and different belief systems that are tied to radical Islam. Well, they're now kind of in charge, or I have a strong feeling that Syria is going to go the way of Libya or Iraq. It's not going to turn into a democracy, folks. Very soon, you're going to be seeing heads dangling around like they're Christmas ornaments. That's the way these people are. To those liberal types out there, or naive ultra-conservatives, in other words, foolish people that don't know much about the world, I can assure you that that part of the planet is never going to incorporate what we call democracy into their system, at least not for the next few centuries. They operate on either a strong man or a bunch of religious fanatics, or a combination of the both. And that includes the allies, the so-called allies of the U.S. there, Saudi Arabia. That ain't no democracy. So the U.S. is now getting further pulled into this. There's a lot of Russians there that are kind of wondering what's going to happen to them. And Israel is now Well, were they part of this? Turkey's also a big player in this game, and they're not too happy of what's going on in Lebanon. And that's just beginning to cover the complication of this. The one thing that I'll bet money on, though, is before too long, we're going to start seeing Syrian refugees show up in the United States. Yay! More people from that part of the world fleeing for the promised land. Maybe that's the motivation. One thing is certain, that when Donald Trump comes into office at the end of January, he's going to have such a mess to deal with. It might not even be something that it might not even be something he can control. This situation is extremely fluid. It could go kablooey, but it's already gone kablooey. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have died in this mess over the last several years. So it's kind of just, we're seeing a bit of a change, maybe the turn of the page of the chapter in that country of Syria, but, well, stay tuned. Now, more on the front of what is turned into, and I mean that in the past tense, World War III, is Romania. You're not seeing much in the news about Romania right now. But over the last couple of weeks, there have been elections. Okay, it's European style. They have runoffs, and I don't know. I don't really understand the European way of picking leaders, but they're playing the same sort of game that was played against Donald Trump. There's a guy named Calin Georgescu, I believe you pronounce his name, who is, for want of a better description, a nationalist, Romania first. No, they don't want anything to do with the war with Ukraine. No, they don't want anything to do with NATO. They want to live peacefully and focus on their own problems. Revolutionary, right? Yeah, I guess so. And he ran a campaign primarily off of social media, and it struck a chord with the Romanian people, and he won the first round there in the presidential election. And, of course, not wanting to be part of NATO, considering Romania borders Ukraine, and, is on the front line of any particular upcoming conflict that the New World Order types want to see. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. And the government promptly canceled the upcoming elections, have announced massive investigations into this guy. And you should see the letters that are coming from the State Department of the U.S. I mean, they're blaming it on Russia. Yes, the Russians, again, they're responsible for the Romanians wanting to put themselves first and not get involved in international conflicts. You see what's going on here, folks. This guy is kind of like a Trump, except without the billions of dollars, and he's being crucified. They do not want countries to have sovereignty over themselves, the people in charge, and that includes the U.S. So here's another case of the U.S. meddling in the affairs of another nation and the desired destiny of their people, to keep them in line, to keep them in NATO, to keep them under control. And nobody is paying attention to this. At least the average American isn't. Now, Trump was able to beat this system. At least it seems that way. It's January 20th can't come here quick enough. But the war's already started, and it's not exactly the way a lot of us thought it would go. Now, I'll get back to that in a bit, but here's another story for you guys. And those are the drones that we're seeing or hearing about. I haven't seen any myself, and I don't know anybody personally who has, but all these reports of drones. Now, there were reports they were like spheres or UFOs. No, there's no real reports that are credible about that. Doesn't mean that there aren't ETs out there that have pulled up in their spaceships and broken out the popcorn to watch the stupid monkeys on Earth kill each other. But the drones are real drones, and some of them are enormous, supposedly as big as a car. And these have been seen by thousands of witnesses around the United States, and they're around strategic locations. They've been spotted off of Trump's home in Florida. They've been seen over Norfolk Naval Base, and there's been other reports in the past of that happening. Where are they coming from, and how come they're not being shot down? Well, first off, they're nothing new. About a year ago, there were reports of drones over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia and Norfolk, which is the largest naval base on Earth. It's where the U.S. parks all of its aircraft carriers when they're not busy somewhere else. This has been going on a while. In fact, there was a Chinese gentleman who was nabbed taking pictures with a drone near Norfolk, and some time ago with a commercial drone, and he immediately fled the area and tried to get back to China. And well, that's an interesting story in and of itself. But where are these drones coming from? Who is putting them out there? Again, it's speculation. We don't know. But one of the reasons they're not shooting them down is, one, it would be too dangerous to do so. You don't shoot a missile at a relatively small object like that because, well, it might miss and land on someone's neighborhood. There are a lot of jurisdictional issues. Unless something comes at a military base and it is an obvious threat, it's handled by the civilian authorities, the cops. Cops aren't really set up to intercept these things. Is it the Chinese? Is it this deep state with their own private drone air force? We don't know, but somebody is definitely flexing their muscles. There's no evidence that any of these devices are armed. They may contain monitoring devices. Maybe they're getting us ready to constantly be looked over physically by something in the sky over our backyards. There's no report of anything being challenged or anything being shot down. Shot down, I can understand. Challenged? I wonder why. Could this be someone exerting force, trying to persuade Mr. Trump to play ball or even to drop out of the game? This is a very significant event. There is precedent that this is how foreign countries have spied on us in the past, but I've never seen a picture of a drone the size of a car before, and I am going to follow this very closely. But there are major big boys playing on a chessboard right now, and all of us are either observers or pawns. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. That we know. Exactly what, exactly why, don't know. But look for these drones to be more visible and more of us to see them. And if you see them, take pictures and post them. Let people know what's going on. Okay, now I'm going to touch on a couple of other little things here. One is something that is just as nasty as the talk of potential nuclear war, which, frankly, I'm tired of hearing about, and we aren't going to know about it unless it happens. You're not going to see a warning anywhere. If you see a mushroom cloud off in the distance, hey, it's happened. But the thing that is even more threatening, frankly, because it can't be controlled by humans as easily as AI. AI is making leaps and bounds as we speak. One of the strangest things I'm seeing is the advances in robotics, especially female companion robotics, and I won't go into any more description there. This is getting to be a real big thing. Saudi Arabia is even getting into this stuff. Now, AI, in my view, is just as bad as, or worse an idea than nuclear weapons ever were. Except the one disadvantage is that now it's out there, it's on its own, and it's growing. And we just talked about drones, and I am wondering if that is not part of the equation. It would explain a lot. It would explain why they're suddenly popping into existence. Drones cannot fly halfway around the world. And I haven't heard of the Chinese putting them in an airplane or shipping them over or something like that. Maybe they've been doing that, but there could be something else going on here that the government is too scared to talk to us about. Perhaps these drones are under some form of AI control. which has infiltrated defense systems in the United States enough so that they're ignored. I'm not saying that they would have command of Air Force or nuclear weapons or anything, but how else is AI going to monitor what's going on places like military bases or even outside of Trump's compound or over the homes of government officials, which we've also heard reports on? It just seems to me that there could be a connection between the two, and I'm suspecting there is. And I'll let you know if more is found out. Okay, one fun little story that you got to know about. I'm not going to advertise this thing, but I did check it out. It's true. At least if it's a... Mr. Donald Trump has come out with his own line of perfume and men's cologne. Yes. I'm not going to give you the website, though. You're going to have to find that on your own. I'm not going to be accused of promoting Trump enterprises, but the scent is called Fight, Fight, Fight. I kid you not. This is real. I went to the trouble of checking out the company that owns the website that seems to be taking orders, and I'm not going to spend a couple of $100s on a bottle of cologne. But it seems to be quite true. You can't make this up. We're in the midst of some of the worst crises in human history, if you look at it that way, and Donald Trump's coming into the White House to save America, but buy my cologne. Buy my perfume, and there's, I don't know what else to say about that. I'm not buying it, by the way, just to let you know. That's not my thing. But if you're looking for a very interesting and expensive Christmas gift, well, there you have it. Yes, I am laughing, people. You've got to. It's just too much some days. Okay, now one thing I'm going to leave you people with, and this is something that a lot of you aren't going to want to hear, but it's something that we have to come to grips with. Before I explain, though, I'm going to go into a little bit of history. One of the things historians love to argue about is when wars actually begin. Now, the American Civil War is generally attributed to starting when Fort Sumter was shelled by the Confederates. And there are some historians who say, no, it began when Abraham Lincoln declared he was going to be sending volunteers to the South to subject it because of its rebellion. And there's some that say that was the day that Lincoln was inaugurated. There's a lot of different options there that you could look at and argue. The general belief is that World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany and the Soviet Union, you don't hear about that too much, when both Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland. And Britain and France didn't declare war on the Soviet Union for some reason, but that's generally the common date that is referred to. Actually, I think it was earlier, and I think it was when about a year and a half or so earlier when the Japanese rolled into China. People usually don't realize major wars have started until well after they start. World War I began with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but at the time nobody would have thought that. I believe, based on all the conflict you're seeing in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and all the conflict that's apparently going to be starting up at some point in the Far East, I'm of the opinion that the Third World War is already on. Americans have killed Russians even a few years ago in various situations in Syria, for example. Americans and Russians have come into military contact. The missiles that have been fired from Ukraine into Russian territory had Americans at the command there. The Russians have done some stuff that's similar. Now, it hasn't gone as far as it will probably go. But I think that everyone has to get very sobered up that the Third World War has already begun. How far it'll go, how wide a conflict it will be, one can only hope and pray that it'll end at some point, but I just see it accelerating and accelerating and accelerating. 40 days is a very long time when it comes to military operations. A couple of weeks ago, the government in Syria seemed to be about as stable and in power as it has been for years, and just in a matter of a few days it went. Things go very quickly when militaries and soldiers are involved. And things can go very quickly between now and the end of January and beyond. But it seems more and more that Donald Trump is not going to inherit a very stable situation. He's probably going to be inheriting a major military conflict. If he came into power today, he would be inheriting a major military conflict. And in spite of his belief and a lot of people's belief that he has the power to make a few phone calls and do a deal, we're not exactly dealing with the most rational of peoples in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. We're dealing with people who don't think like us. They don't have the same values that many of us do. And then again, a lot of them do over there. People in Romania, for example, they just want to live in peace. The same thing with a lot of those in Ukraine who have now fled the country, never to return, and soon to be all those people in Syria, which are going to be fleeing somewhere else and would want nothing more than to stay in their own homes. When elephants dance, the little creatures underfoot get trampled to death. And I think that it's time that the elephants left the scene and let the little ones, like us, just live our lives. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and share with your enemies. And please, 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 consider a paid subscription. I also have a drive on now to buy badly needed new equipment. I've been asked by several people to expand coverage, and that's going to take some gear. If you wish to contact me, I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That is feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm on other social media platforms. If you look for me, I am not on Facebook. This podcast originates at Substack. The address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed. Good day.